Hello, I'm Carolyn Fay. This is number 0819, the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, and it comes to you right now.
The following program is brought to you in living color.
Now, it's time for an eclectic mix of interviews and some of the oddest news stories you'll ever hear. It's the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder.
Hey there, hi there, ho there! Peter Anthony Holder here with you, and yes, this is indeed another edition of the Stuff File program, number 0819. And coming up on this edition of the Stuff File program, you'll meet Doug Lawrence, who is the author of Grief, the Silent Pandemic. What's the most problematic situation? A person who can't handle their grief, or a person who can't handle a person who is grieving?
It's a combination of the both. Actually, I had a conversation where it was the aspect of, I know a friend is grieving, but I'm not sure what I should say or if I should say anything, so I don't talk to them. The isolation is part of the silent pandemic. As a society, we struggle to really truly understand grief. From there, we really struggle with, how do I help? What are some of the coping skills that I can use myself in order to help others on their healing journey?
D.H. Morris is the author of the novel The Girl of Many Crowns, a story that is set in the 9th century and deals with a princess named Judith, who is actually D.H.'s ancestor.
I knew that we had several lines going back to royalty, but I never thought about it. My aunt got me interested in genealogy. I thought maybe I had better look and see all this genealogy she's given me and figure a place to start. This popped out as something that looked like it was a mistake. And she really didn't know anything about Judith. The story itself haunted me for several decades.
Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy, is back on the show to talk about space, including the all-female Blue Origin launch.
This is a big milestone in terms of people going into space, having the first all-female crew, and this is since 1963 when the Soviet astronaut Valentina Tereshkova had her solo mission. But this time it's not just one female, it's 6. It's an interesting group. Of course, you have some well-known people, like probably the most is Katy Perry, Gayle King. You've got on board a film producer, Carrie-Anne Flynn. Of course, you've got, Lauren Sanchez, fiancée of Jeff Bezos.
And there's lots and lots of Stuff File news, dad joke theater, morning shower thoughts, and of course, an idiot of the day. The guest later, the person who told you this was show number 0819, was Carolyn Fay, a singer, actress, and playwright. Thank you very much, Carolyn, for doing the guest slate on this edition of the Stuff File program, a show that is listener-supported, fan-funded radio that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Well, let's get right to the stuff. Two Belgian teenagers are being accused of trying to transport ants out of Kenya.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up.
The teens were arrested for allegedly trying to traffic the small insects to Europe and Asia. The pair claim they did not know what they were doing was illegal. Police discovered thousands of ants packed into test tubes during their investigation.
Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life.
The Kenyan Wildlife Service says this case represents a shift in trafficking trends from iconic large mammals to lesser-known yet ecologically critical species. So, the question is whether the Belgian teens were complicit or just ignorant.
It's about keeping those ants in line.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. 4 men in Baker, Louisiana rode horses into a Walmart on April the 8th. They trotted and galloped through the aisles As shoppers and employees looked on, the riders who called themselves the Cutthroat Cowboys all turned themselves in on April the 11th with one 18-year-old Mason Webb explaining that they had no real purpose for the stunt other than it was something fun to do. Said Webb, "We didn't want to hurt anybody. That's my emotional support animal." The riders were charged with entering and remaining after forbidden, unlawful post of criminal activity and disturbing the peace. In other words, they were just horsing around. They need to be reined in, or they'll just stir up trouble. Everything happens at Walmart.
You can always count on certain things, and Walmart's one of those.
What's in a name? Well, a Florida man identified as Edward Cocaine was arrested for allegedly pulling out a knife on Subway restaurant employees. Cocaine reportedly got into a dispute with the workers over their bad attitudes. In other words, he cracked. According to the Brevard County Sheriff's Office, Cocaine became so irate with the employees that yelling at them from across the counter wasn't enough. Cocaine allegedly pulled out a knife but was restrained, and then he left the location willingly. However, Cocaine was later arrested and now faces assault charges. Well, he's probably gone through his life with that name, so chances are he's probably always on edge. Perhaps he should just change his name.
What about Bolivian marching band?
They know all the slang terms. They have a list.
Even snowboarding?
Even disco dust.
White girl interrupter?
Even forest bump.
Poker sugar?
I wouldn't even try powdered go-nuts.
Do you want to build a snowman?
Yes, but I can't.
Or maybe not.
Greetings, passengers, to another Stuff File program installment of Idiots in Flight. This is the pre-boarding announcement. We are now inviting those passengers who are complete half-wits to begin boarding at this time. Thank you.
And still with interesting names, an Indonesian man on a Singapore Airlines flight from China to Singapore had 2 glasses of champagne, took a nap, then stepped into the restroom a little after 4:30 a.m. While inside, he said he suddenly got an idea to record a video of himself surprising someone by flashing his genitals. He returned to his seat, set up his phone camera, and exposed himself to a female flight attendant. She not only saw what he was doing, she saw his phone pointed at her and reported the incident to her supervisor. When confronted by the supervisor, the man denied the accusation but surrendered his phone to the supervisor, who found and viewed the video. When the flight landed 2 hours later, police met the plane and arrested the man, who has a name his parents are probably rethinking. The 23-year-old is named Brilliant Anjaya. He wrote a letter of heartfelt apology and pleaded guilty to a count of sexual exposure. District Judge Paul Kwan said Anjaya's actions were inexplicable and inexcusable. In other words, not brilliant. He was sentenced to 3 weeks in jail. It could be worse. The judge could have ordered Brilliant to change his given name.
Here's a warning to some passengers. The air marshals are getting creative. For most of the flight, you might have zip-tied limbs and you may be duct-taped in an overhead bin until your diverted destination. But the Stuff File program appreciates you. Thank you.
And let's get to our first guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? Doug Lawrence is an international certified mentor, and he has had over 30 years of mentoring and leadership experience. He's also the author of Grief, The Silent Pandemic. Doug joins us via Zoom from Regina. Hi, Doug.
Hello, how are you today?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. The topic of grief, I want to talk about the subtitle, The Silent Pandemic. Why do you consider it the silent pandemic?
If you take out, it actually goes back quite a ways, but long story short is the grief impacts so many different people in so many different ways, and we don't do a lot to manage that. And so consequently, what is happening is that it's something that is causing a lot of turmoil for people with their mental health and all of those things. And so I felt that it was something that we weren't giving the attention to, somewhat like COVID. So therefore, I gave it the handle of the silent pandemic as a result of it.
When it comes to grief, what is the problematic situation? Is it the fact that somebody can't handle their grief, or other people can't handle someone who is grieving?
I think it's a combination of the both. I had a conversation here just the last couple of days where it was the aspect of, I know so and so, I know a friend is grieving, but I'm not sure what I should say or if I should say anything. So I don't say, I don't talk to them or anything like that. And the isolation is part of, the silent pandemic piece, is that we struggle to know, as a society, we struggle to really truly understand grief. And then from there, we really struggle with, how do I help? What are some of the coping skills that I can use myself in order to help others on their healing journey?
Well, what is, from the person who is feeling grief, what are the emotions that they are going through? Is it survivor's guilt? Is it a guilt for not treating that person or the way you wanted to or should have when they were alive? What are all the emotions that are coming up, and how does one deal with that?
There's so many different phases, if you want to call it that. I know that there's been lots of research that have been done on the phases of grief, but I'm reluctant to suggest that we should be following along with each of the stages. So I'm in the stage one. I'm in denial. Therefore, I should expect that I'll go to stage two, which may be something else. And those are all myths that I'm trying to dispel through Grief the Silent Pandemic, and obviously through, conversations like what you and I are having today.
Okay, I don't want to necessarily be stereotypical in this topic, but do people from different parts of the world grieve differently, or do people from different genders grieve differently? There's some situation where people are very expressive in their grief and it's very cathartic for them to get it out, kind of thing. And then there are people who are very stoic and don't talk about what's going on with their grief or even mentioning that they are grieving. Is there a right way or a wrong way of doing this? And are those two examples that I just described either or the right way or wrong way?
There's no right way. That's probably my best answer for you, is there is no right way. Each person deals with grief on their own platitude. And I know I'm an example of that. I lost my wife to cancer in 2021. I'm still grieving. And some people think that's kind of weird, but that's just how I'm dealing with it. I hate weekends. I hate weekends because that was when we used to spend all our time as a couple together, and now that's been taken away from me. So I deal with my grief through that way. And there's other people. I'm also part of a support group that, when I look at some of the people in the support group, they're grieving differently than what I am and what I would likely undertake to do.
So again, one of my previous questions, how do you deal with that? And I'm talking about the people around you. Like, you must be aware of, like you say, when your wife passed away several years ago, you must be aware of personalities around you who, some of them are step-toeing around you gingerly. Some people are more talkative to you about your situation and your grief process. So how do you deal with the people around you who are dealing with your grief?
The most probably the best thing you can do, and how I deal with it is how I describe it in a lot of cases is that I hope that people will feel comfortable enough to open the door and step outside and sort of say, how can I help you on your grieving journey, and feel confident and comfortable enough to be able to have those conversations. Because the thing you don't want to do is close the door and totally ignore the person. I went through that when I lost my mom, and I went back to work. And when I get back to work, most of my work colleagues had no idea what I was going through, because they didn't have a support structure in place. They didn't. They basically didn't know how to deal with grief as it exists.
When did you write, or when did you start writing the book, Grief, the Silent Pandemic? Was it after your wife had passed away?
Yeah, it took me probably about a year to write Grief, the Silent Pandemic. And I think that, not I think, I know that my wife's passing happened for a reason. And I think part of it was to help with the writing of this particular book, because in reality, large part of her story is the story of Grief, the Silent Pandemic.
So was it part of your catharsis in grieving that you were writing this book?
Yes, it became very therapeutic for me to be able to sit down and write. It was also difficult. It's probably one of the most difficult things that I've had to do, which was recall all the different things that had taken place right up to and including Deborah's passing. You know, the different things that would take place. Like I still visualize sitting on her hospital bed in emergency, and I still see the doctor coming in and giving us the news that she had cancer and she was probably going to die. And I still see that to this very day.
Your friends and family, your existing friends and family right now, have they read the book, and are they getting an insight into your grief because of the book you've written?
They haven't read the book yet. I know that they will read the book. They will definitely get an insight into, because it's I struggle at times to be truthfully honest with how I grieve and how they grieve, and sometimes I feel as though maybe they could take a couple extra steps on the grieving journey to help me better understand where they are, and that's not always the case. So they definitely will be reading. My daughter and my son will definitely be reading the book for sure. And I've got some friends that have indicated that as soon as the book is published, they want to get a copy so that they can read it as well.
Well, as I said in the introduction, you are a 30 years of mentoring and leadership experience, so you're always dealing with people in a personal and professional way. And I'm just curious to know, in writing this particular book and doing the research to come out with this book, have you yourself looked at how you may have dealt with grieving people before your wife died?
It's given me a different perspective on the whole grief thing. And it's also given me a different perspective on how I might manage my grief differently as a result of what I've learned, doing the research, doing the writing, basically having the flashbacks of, various things that happened during Deborah's illness. And so, yes, there's definitely been some epiphanies, I guess, for lack of a better choice of words, that I've experienced as a result of writing the book, but also the aspect of my loss of my wife.
Well, again, I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm thankful for the fact that you've written this book, because I'm sure it can help a lot of people. The book is called Grief, The Silent Pandemic. And Douglas, I thank you very, very much for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Doug Lawrence, author of Grief, The Silent Pandemic. You can go to our website at thestufffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0819, and you'll find the links to Doug's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order his book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
And now, Dad Joke Theater.
What country's capital is growing the fastest? Ireland. Every day it's Dublin.
Join us again for another Stuff File program, Dad Joke Theater.
There's still more guests, more news, and an idiot of the day coming your way on the Stuff File program. Stay tuned. The Stuff File program is a listener-supported, fan-funded radio show that depends on you for our success. Join us at patreon.com to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. Sign up and find out about our rewards program. Being a patron doesn't have to be a long-term commitment. There's absolutely no obligation. You could join today and end whenever you'd like, but the time we have your support would be so greatly appreciated. We'd also love to hear your thoughts about the show and even your ideas for rewards. Join us for the ride. Join us at patreon.com/thestufffileprogram program.
I'm standing in awe and admiration for Canada. Hello, this is Peter Mansbridge. It's a reporter's duty to be unbiased, but I'm so proud of Canadians everywhere, standing united, buying Canadian products, supporting Canadian businesses, and our very way of life. Shop as if your country depends on it. Keep your money in Canada for Canada.
This is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. This broadcast is coming to you from upstairs. Get out of the house.
And still to come on the program, we'll talk to the author of The Girl of Many Crowns, plus Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy, is back in with his monthly visit to talk about space. We also have a morning shower thought coming your way, and of course an idiot of the day, and much more in Stuff File News right here, right now. A Staten Island man allegedly set sex toys on fire in a backyard, and the flames eventually spread and destroyed a neighbor's home. Fortunately, the 88-year-old woman who lived in the residence was unharmed. The suspicious fire was started with lighter fluid and included rubber privates meant to resemble female genitalia. Investigators say the suspect said he was trying to get rid of DNA on the toys. 37-year-old Harry Torres was charged with arson and reckless endangerment. Said Torres, "I started the fire, I was in the backyard at my house, and I lit 2 sex toys on fire." Torres used lighter fluid and told investigators he was trying to get rid of the DNA on the sex toys. I think this comes under the heading of extremely paranoid. Police were called to a shopping center in Palm Bay, Florida, on a report that 40-year-old Christopher Marlowe was back. Marlowe had been banned from the property for trespassing, legally informed that he could not return, and returning made him subject to arrest for trespassing. He was easy to spot, considering he was dressed in a bright yellow suit with white and red striped sleeves, a red clown nose, and riding a Stingray-style bicycle. In other words, he looked like Ronald McDonald. Police say Marlowe forcibly resisted arrest and that they found a weapon on him. Upon putting Marlowe in their patrol car to take him to jail, an officer observed, "You look like a clown." Marlowe replied, "I am a clown, stupid." You know, you could reverse the last 2 words that Marlowe shouted, and the self-description would be even more accurate. Yeah. Okay, how drunk do you have to be to do this? A Georgia man opened the rear door of a police car, climbed in, and told the cop at the wheel that he wanted a ride home. Around 10 p.m., 31-year-old Andrew Davidson allegedly entered the vehicle and shut the door while there was a human being at the wheel, to wit, Officer K. Thomas. The car in question was stationed on a St. Petersburg, Florida street, and the cruiser's emergency lights were flashing. Davidson stated that he wanted a ride home, according to a complaint charging Davidson with trespassing in an occupied structure. Davidson lives in Statesboro, a city about 55 miles from Savannah, Georgia. We don't know why he was in Florida or where he was staying, but Officer Kristen Thomas noted that the accused man showed an indication of alcohol influence. So the question I have is, did he get into the backseat of a patrol car because he was too drunk to realize? Or did he get into the back of the patrol car because that is his natural spot? And finally, in this section of Stuff File News, before we get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder, 33-year-old Caitlin Dye, a postal worker in Melbourne, Florida, was arrested on April the 12th after she allegedly stopped to attend a house party along her route. Police were alerted to a postal truck driving the wrong way on South Harbor City Boulevard. When they caught up with the driver, the truck was swerving in and out of its lane. Dye appeared confused and disoriented. She told police she had consumed 2 shots of vodka at the house party and had been falling asleep while driving, which caused her to swerve. Dye was charged with DUI. You gotta watch out for those drunk delivery drivers, and when you're getting a package, you really shouldn't celebrate by offering them a drink. That's just asking for trouble, because apparently they don't have any willpower.
What a day. 15 deliveries and 1 to go. Oh, have another. Come on, bottoms up. 1 for the road. You gotta be social. You gotta be sociable. You just can't refuse their generous hospitality. Their hospitality. You just can't refuse them.
And let's get to our next guest here in this edition of the Stuff File program, shall we? D.H. Morris is the author of the novel The Girl of Many Crowns. It's set in the 9th century and deals with a princess named Judith. But is the story true, and what connection does Judith have with the author? That's what we're about to find out. D.H. Morris joins us via Zoom from Kansas City. Hi, D.H.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
Just tickety-boo. Thanks very much for being on the program with us. So, right off the bat, I'll ask that question. How much of this is a true story, and what connection do you have with Judith?
All the events in the book are true. And as improbable as they sound, they are taken from the historical record. If you want to call it fictional, parts of the book are my trying to imagine what that event looked like and what the characters' feelings were during that period of time.
So the genesis of the story is a true story, but you embellish on it a little bit because it's a novel, correct?
Correct. Some of the the poetry that's in there, the songs, those are all taken originally from the 9th century records. Some of even the conversations, I was able to take some of those conversations from records. So there is a lot more that is real in there than fiction. But I had to imagine, of course, most of the dialogue, the descriptions of the places, most of those are taken right out of history as well. So I didn't have to make anything up in the way that I would have if I had created the characters in my mind and the places. So it's very as true to fact as I could get it.
So again, what is your connection to Judith?
Well, Judith and her knight in shining armor, Baldwin, Iron Arm, are ancestors of mine. And the way I found this story was I saw Judith on a family tree, and she was 12 years old and married to the 50-year-old widower, the King of Wessex. She's the Princess of Francia. And then 2 years later, it shows that she's married to the King of Wessex' son at 14. And then several years later, it shows that she's married now to Baldwin Ironarm, the Count of Flanders. And I thought, there's something wrong here. I need to prove this wrong and correct my genealogy chart. So I started doing research. And the more research I did, the more amazed I was at the story behind Judith and Baldwin. They actually become, to many people, the founding couple of Bruges, which is in Belgium. And so the Count of Flanders, for many years, for nearly 1,000 years, were named Baldwin after Baldwin Ironarm and were descendants of his. So it's a very interesting story. It's very inspirational. Obviously, it ends with a happy ending because the couple was able to have children and descendants. So it's a fascinating story.
So when you were doing the genealogy of your family and you found this story, I mean, was this a complete surprise to you? The extraordinary life that your ancestors have had?
The story was, I knew that we had several lines going back to royalty, but I never thought about it. And then when my aunt got me interested in genealogy, I thought maybe I had better look and see all this genealogy she's given me and figure a place to start. And as I was looking at it, this popped out as something that looked like it was a mistake. And she really didn't know anything about Judith, and she thought it looked odd as well. And so the story itself haunted me for several decades until COVID hit. And then I decided this is the time to complete my research and write this story, if for no other reason, for my descendants, so that they would know what an extraordinary couple this was. The Princess Judith marries twice at her father, King Charles's command. When she decides she's not going to marry a third time at his command and returns to France from Wessex, he puts her in prison. Actually, it was in a palace, but he imprisons her in the palace and tells her that she will never leave unless she agrees to marry at his command a third time. And she says no. So she's willing to be in prison for the rest of her life if she needs to be. Well, her brother was also a king, King Louis the Stammerer. His companion is Count Baldwin Ironarm. Now, in the book, I show that they would know each other before she was married because he was her brother's companion. And then when she returns, they fall in love, and Baldwin Ironarm is willing to risk his life, and her brother helps too, to help her escape from the palace, and they elope. Then more adventure ensues.
You've written this book and it's out there for the rest of the world to see, but what was it like when you shared this book, this story, with your family?
It was interesting because I really wrote it thinking that my daughters and granddaughters would love it more. And it was a girl's story, but it follows parallel stories until they get together. So we follow Judith and we follow Baldwin and all of their adventures until they actually decide to elope together, and then their story becomes one. When my husband and my son read the book, their first reaction was, this is not Judith's story, this is Baldwin's story. And so they related to Baldwin right off the bat. There are a lot more war scenes, Viking attacks, assassination plots. There's a lot of action going on because that was what the events said happened. And so the annals of the day that the monks kept, I followed 7 years, and this is really the formation of Europe as we know it today, because Charlemagne's empire has been divided into 3 parts. And Charles, the King of Francia, his stepbrother, Louis the German, is trying to take his kingdom from him. And he has Vikings attacking all the time. He has other rebel lords who are trying to overthrow him. So he has a lot going on. His decision to marry off his daughter was definitely a political one to kind of shore up relations and get some benefit from it there and protect his kingdom. The men in my family love the book for a different reason from the reason why the women do. The women see it as an empowering story, a young girl who starts out as being a pawn, basically, of kings, and then finally decides that she has self-determination and she's going to decide what she's going to do with the rest of her life. And it works out.
You said earlier that when you wrote this story, drama ensues. I get this feeling that this story is not finished. Are there spin-offs and sequels that you are planning with the story of Judith and Baldwin?
Unfortunately, the monks stopped writing about women when they no longer were notorious. So her decision to elope with someone other than who her father had determined she should marry was a big scandal in the 9th century. So that is how she made it into the records. Usually they just wrote about men. We know from inference that, a few things that may have happened after they decide to rebuild Bruges, or it was kind of a ruin, and they take it on and they make it something beautiful and a thriving city. And it is one of the most beautiful cities, I think, in Europe. But I don't feel comfortable in doing a sequel to it because there isn't enough historical record there for me to use. And I really like to base everything in fact if I can. But I am doing a prequel. And the prequel is about her grandmother. She was named for her grandmother, Judith, who was the empress of the Holy Roman Empire at the time. She married as the second wife Louis the Pious, who was the son of Charlemagne and who inherited all of Charlemagne's empire. She was 20, 21. Her husband, Louis the Pious, was a widower. He was in his 40s. So there wasn't as big an age difference, but she kind of had a Cinderella story at the beginning because the aides to Louis the Pious wanted the emperor to remarry after he lost his wife. They felt like he was too miserable and they wanted to find a bride for him. So they sent throughout the entire empire invitations to the nobles. If you have eligible and beautiful daughters and talented, intelligent, all of these things, bring them in and we will have a bride show, almost like a beauty pageant. And then from that event, the emperor selected Judith as his second wife. Everything was fine with the marriage until she gave birth to a son, Charles, who is the younger Judith's father. And then Louis the Pious's sons, who had already decided how the empire was going to be divided, saw a new threat to their kingdoms. And they did everything they could to destroy Judith, to destroy her son Charles, and even to imprison and take away the power of their father. So they started a civil war against their father. And Judith the Empress was an amazing force in protecting Charles and keeping him alive and helping him to fight as he got older and protect his own part of the kingdom that was going to be his.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and it's actually literally your fascinating story because it's your own lineage. The book is called The Girl of Many Crowns, and I thank you very, very much, DH, for taking the time to be on the program with us.
Well, thank you for having me, Peter. It's been wonderful.
D.H. Morris, author of The Girl of Many Crowns. You can go to our website at thestuffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0819, and you'll find the link to DH's site, plus links to either Amazon.com or Amazon.ca, where you can order her book directly. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder.
Giving you something to think about. This is Morning Shower Thoughts.
Why do we call it a building if it's already built?
Morning Shower Thoughts from the Stuff File program.
Got something for the mailbag? Drop Peter a line. He'd love to hear from you. Send your email to mailbag@thestuffile.com. And remember, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H. That's mailbag@thestuffile.com. Or catch up with him on Twitter or Facebook. There's more Stuff File coming your way in just a few moments.
Here's a brief word about our show and my book. If you become a regular Patreon patron of the Stuff File program, I'll give you an e-version of my book, Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. It's easy to do. Just go to patreon.com and become a patron to help make this show an even bigger and better radio experience. So, join Patreon and claim your copy of Great Conversations, My Interviews with Two Men on the Moon and a Galaxy of Stars. Sign up at patreon.com/the Stuff File program.
Coming to you from Canada, a place where fighting is frowned upon, unless it's on an ice rink. This is the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder. Now, the Stuff File presents Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy. It's radio that's out of this world.
Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy, is a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada and the author of National Geographic's Backyard Guide to the Night Sky and also National Geographic's Stargazer's Atlas, the ultimate guide to the night sky. And Andrew, on April 14th, when Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin took off from the launch pad, it meant that for the first time in 62 years, a man didn't take off into space, as Blue Origin had an all-female crew.
That's right. So, this is a big milestone in terms of space jaunts of people going into space, having the first all-female crew. And this is since 1963, when the Soviet astronaut Valentina Tereshkova had her solo mission. So, but this time it's not just one female, it's 6. It's an interesting group. It's, of course, you have some well-known people, like, of course, probably the most is Katy Perry, the global pop star. You've got Gayle King, who's a broadcaster, a veteran journalist. You've got on board a film producer, Carrie-Anne Flynn. Of course, you've got, Lauren Sanchez, fiancée of Jeff Bezos. She's the one who actually put together this mission. There's a former NASA aerospace engineer, Aisha Bao. Then there is a Nobel Peace Prize nominee, a civil rights activist, Amanda Nguyen, who's part of it. And there's a film producer, Carrie-Anne Flynn. So it's a very interesting group of women. They officially passed the Kármán line, which is 100 kilometers altitude. And that officially makes them astronaut. They get their astronaut wings once they've passed that, once they ascend past that 100 kilometer line. And it was only a 10-minute mission. It really didn't last very long, but it's a milestone in that there hasn't been that many women that have gone into space. There's really a lack of women. And I think this mission kind of raises awareness of that.
I agree, although I wouldn't consider it it's a milestone in the fact that it was all women. But when it comes to Blue Origin, and you know the argument I'm going to make right now, they call everyone who's been on a Blue Origin flight, including William Shatner, the list goes on, they call them astronauts. And I'm sorry, they're not astronauts. That's like saying, if I take a transatlantic flight, I'm a pilot. No, I'm a passenger.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's the definition. And I think that will depend on, that there's varying thoughts of it. I mean, technically, if you fly above 100 kilometers, you are officially in space. Therefore, you become an astronaut. Now, if you want to add to that definition of that you're a pilot, are you doing something, scientific experiments? Are you moving ahead our engineering knowledge of space engineering or something like that? If you want to add that onto it, you can. But that's, I think, still up for debate. I agree with you on that. But a lot of criticism about this mission has revolved around that, well, what did they do? And this was just a publicity stunt. They were only up there for 10 minutes. But, this is space tourism. And what they're showcasing here, I think the big picture, other than that showing that this is an all-female space crew, is to bring attention to space tourism. If we want people to go into space to live and work on the moon, on Mars, on space stations in different parts of the solar system, we have to show that this is becoming something more regular of an affair of going into space, that it's becoming more common. Now, a lot of people argue that going into space will never become that common. It'll remain out of reach for the average person. The risks will never go away, and of being on a rocket. It's inherently risky of going on a rocket. But
but they said
they're trying to push.
They said the same thing about planes.
They did. They did. Exactly. And look where we are. Where planes have, every day for $1,000, I could go on a plane this afternoon and fly to the other side of the world. It's incredible. And there's this incentive, a commercial incentive, and Blue Origin is just one. SpaceX is another one that's taking it to the next level. But the idea is to make it a more commonplace. And always, just like if we use that analogy of planes, where it was so many decades ago, it was only the well-heeled, the rich and famous that did take part on these flights, and they were given a lot of media coverage when those flights were happening. And it was out of reach to the common man. But the more that happened, the lower the price point came down so that everyone can participate. And I think this is just a small little piece in that direction that we're heading towards.
Yeah. The other thing, too, is you can't escape the visual of, because of what Blue Origin looks like. Jeff Bezos's phallic symbol going into space with 6 women. I know.
There's a lot of funny things. And, you go on YouTube, you can see, the Austin Powers clips being used, right, from the movie. And it's there's tons of that. But I think some of them are kind of shaded in a sense. I've been watching some of those YouTubers who are mocking and making fun of them. There's one YouTuber who specializes in space, and she compared Katy Perry's mission to what a monkey did, back in the 1960s. But, then you kind of dig a little deeper, and why are they doing, such shade to this mission? It's all partly because some of these YouTubers if you look, they end up being really cozy with SpaceX. They're doing a lot of SpaceX mission, which is a direct competitor to Jeff Bezos' Blue Origins.
Also, on the very day of the liftoff, Olivia Munn was on the Today Show railing against the women who were going up into space because of the cost. It's not like tax dollars are at work here. There are no tax dollars at all. And
no, this was a private mission that Jeff Bezos basically foot the bill. It's his money, and the fact is that he has nonprofits. He does contribute to charities and such. It's not like it's one or the other. He's able to do both.
Exactly. I think we have time for one more story here, and then we can go to Patreon after that. But we've spent so much time talking about this that we have to talk about my favorite story of the month, and that is poop on the moon. Who knew that so much of that stuff was left behind 50 years ago, and that now somebody wants to recycle it, clean it up?
Yeah, this is interesting. Now, so there was a really interesting story in the New York Post about this. And, I started digging in when you and I were talking, banding this idea about, and I go, this is really interesting. I didn't know that there were 96 bags of human waste that was left over from the Apollo missions. But it's true. There are, lots of these waste material that were left behind because they had to make room. The astronauts were carrying back on their flights hundreds of pounds of lunar soil and rocks. And so they had to make their ship lighter. And so anything that they can leave behind, even like used spacesuits were left behind. Now the question is, all this waste, what happens? We want to make human flight to the moon and to deep space, other locations, sustainable. We want to make recycling systems for long duration space travel. And so NASA has put out a $3 million challenge. It's called the Luna Recycle Challenge. And it's a competition. It's in 2 phases, and it's focused on the design and development of recycling solutions that can reduce solid waste like this, that the Apollo missions, for instance, produced, and improve the sustainability of longer-term lunar missions. We're preparing, with the Artemis missions of going back to the moon. We're not only going to just go there for a couple of days. The first few missions that are part of Artemis are going to be lasting for a week, for 2 weeks, maybe upwards of a month. We'll be building out habitats, and sooner or later, within 10, 20 years, we'll definitely have a colony on the moon that's permanently occupied. And there's a lot of waste. And so what do we do with that on the moon? And can we recycle it? So they're looking through this $3 million global competition that people can look at how they can improve efficiency, reduce toxic outputs, basically creating small-scale technologies that could be used not just in space, but maybe even down here on Earth, around the globe.
And that's the one thing that people tend to forget, that a lot of technology that we use every day came out of, back in the day, the old Gemini and Apollo missions, because things had to be more compact. Things had to do something in order to get into space and to get to the moon. And a lot of those things were then later applicable to our everyday lives.
Absolutely. And this is this heritage that this kind of competition is out there, building on, that NASA is so well known for, is miniaturizing, recycling. I mean, just the air that astronauts breathe on board their spacecrafts, on board the space station, that's recycled. The human waste that they have on there is recycled. But when you're talking about going into really deep space and living on the moon, many of these things have to be updated, the technologies. We're still working perhaps with some of the heritage of the 1960s. But now that we're thinking about living and working permanently in deep space, that means far away from Earth, not low Earth orbit like the space station that's only 400 kilometers above our heads, but like the moon, which is 400,000 kilometers away, or Mars, which is on average, 80 million kilometers away. You have to be self-sustaining, and being able to recycle your waste products is a huge thing when resources are going to be very limited.
And for the record, for anybody out there listening who wasn't necessarily paying attention, you did say they had to make their ship lighter. Just
exactly.
Want to clear that up.
Yes, spaceship. That's right. Spacecraft. How about that?
Exactly. We're just about out of time, but I think we can go to Patreon because there are so many other things we can talk about.
There are so many cool stories I gotta share, so let's do it.
Okay, then.
Clear skies.
Andrew Fazekas, the Night Sky Guy. You can go to our website at thestuffile.com to the page for this show, which is show number 0819, and you'll find links to Andrew's site to get your own personal autographed copy of his books. Patreon subscribers, you can hear more of Andrew as a Patreon reward extra, where we'll discuss a new comet drawing the attention of stargazers. The most powerful explosions in space may have been the source of our gold, the largest structure in the universe, and hints of alien life on an exoplanet. Just go to our Patreon page, and if you're not already a member, become one of the select patrons of the show. Visit patreon.com/thestuffileprogram. You're listening to the Stuff File program with me, Peter Anthony Holder. And boys and girls, it's that moment you've all been waiting for. It's time now for the Idiot of the Day.
And now it's time for the strange things adults do. The Stuff File presents the Idiot of the Day.
A social media influencer live streaming his visit to the Grand Canyon is now facing federal charges for defacing a historic archaeological landmark while he broadcast the alleged crime to thousands of viewers. I won't even mention his website or his full name because I'm not giving him the attention that he so greatly craves, so I'll just call him ID for short. He used a rock to etch his website into an ancient sandstone formation at Horseshoe Bend, a revered attraction near Page, Arizona. The crude graffiti measured 36 inches long by 6 inches tall and was dug into the soft stone by as much as a quarter inch. As the affidavit stated, it was done purposefully and with blatant disregard for the preservation of natural resources. The damage caused by carving this inscription into the rock is permanent and cannot be undone. And again, the whole thing was live streamed. A National Park Service, or NPS, ranger later caught up with him at a local motel. By the way, last year ID was taken to task by outraged viewers after he claimed that he had been abusing his dog. Anyway, his wrongdoing at Horseshoe Bend first came to the attention of law enforcement by way of an anonymous tip submitted to the NPS online portal on January 5th. When confronted by the ranger, ID also streamed that conversation. He admitted to defacing and vandalizing the natural resource and stated that he did not know it was illegal. ID was issued a citation for vandalism, a misdemeanor. If convicted, he faces up to a year behind bars and a $100,000 fine. Now, why? Oh, why? Would you not only live stream your vandalism, but live stream your initial interaction with authorities? Well, there are two reasons, actually. One, you're an incredibly narcissistic, attention-seeking hog. And two, you're an idiot!
Gee, I'm only a kid, but even I know you're an idiot.
And that's it for this edition of the Stuff File program, number 0819. Hope you enjoyed it. The website is thestufffile.com, and once again, stuff is spelled S-T-U-P-H, where you'll find information and links on all of our guests by going to the weekly Stuff File page. Just look for the corresponding program number, and once again, that's 0819. Email me at peter@thestufffile.com. You can also find me on Facebook, Spoutable, Mastodon, and Blue Sky as PA Holder. Check us out on patreon.com, or you can become a patron of the program. Hope to see you back here for our next show on the air, online, or as a download. We're coming to you from everywhere, including kdxradio.com, over the air on World FM in New Zealand, WLSL-LP FM in Dade City, Florida, KZZH-LP FM in Eureka, California, CKUW FM in Winnipeg, CFMU in Hamilton, CKLU in Sudbury, Local 107.3 FM in St. John, CHSR in Fredericton, and also streaming on just about any streaming service your little heart desires. That's it. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Stuff File program with Peter Anthony Holder, a presentation of Flying Fish Communications. Always remember that an apple a day keeps the doctor away. And with a bushel of apples, you could have a hell of a time with the doctor's spouse.